The Moon Over the Mountain. Atsushi Nakajima. Li Ling of Rosei was a man of great learning and exceptional talent. In the final years of the Tenpo era, he achieved distinction at a young age by passing the imperial examination and earning a place on the official register. Soon after, he was appointed a minor post as an official in Tonen. However, he was a proud and aloof man, deeply conscious of his own abilities, and he could not bear to serve as a lowly bureaucrat. Before long, he resigned from his position and withdrew to his native village, severing ties with the world and devoting himself entirely to poetry. Rather than endure the humiliation of bowing before corrupt and powerful officials, he chose to dedicate himself to literature, hoping that his name as a poet would live on for 100 years after his death. Yet, literary fame did not come easily, and as time passed, his poverty deepened. Li Ling gradually became consumed by frustration. His once youthful and full-cheeked face grew gaunt. His flesh withered away, and his bones became prominent. His eyes alone burned with an unnatural intensity, and there was no trace left of the handsome young man who had once passed the imperial examination. Several years later, unable to endure the hardships of poverty any longer, he finally swallowed his pride for the sake of his wife and child's survival. He journeyed eastward, once more to accept a minor government post. In part, this decision was also due to his growing despair over his literary ambitions. By then, many of his former peers had already risen to high positions, and the thought of having to bow before those whom he had once dismissed as dullards wounded his pride unbearably. He grew increasingly sullen, his resentment and bitterness festering within him. A year after taking office, he set out on an official journey. One evening, while staying near the banks of the Josui River, he suddenly sprang from his bed in the middle of the night, his face pale, shouting incomprehensibly. Without another word, he leaped outside and disappeared into the darkness. He never returned. Search parties combed the surrounding mountains and fields, but no trace of him was ever found. From that moment on, no one knew what had become of Li Ling. The following year, an imperial inspector named En of Chingun was dispatched by imperial decree to travel to Rainan. Along the way, he stopped for the night in the land of Shou. The next morning, just before dawn, he prepared to set out on his journey when the station official warned him. Beyond this point, a man-eating tiger has been sighted. Travelers cannot pass unless it is broad daylight. It is still too early, please wait a little longer. However, N, trusting in the strength of his numerous attendants, dismissed the official's caution and departed. Relying on the dim light of the waning moon, they made their way through a grassy forest path. Suddenly, from the underbrush, a fierce tiger leaped out. It seemed as if it would lunge at N at any moment, but instead, it abruptly turned and vanished back into the thicket. From within the dense foliage, a human voice murmured, repeating the words, "That was close. That was close." And recognized that voice. Despite his fear, a realization struck him like lightning, and he cried out. That voice. Is it not my friend, Li Ling? And in Li Ling, had both passed the imperial examination in the same year. Given Li Chou's aloof nature and the scarcity of his friendships, An had been one of his closest companions. Perhaps it was En's mild temperament that had never clashed with Li Chou's sharp and unyielding spirit. From the thicket, there was no reply at first. Only the faint sound of suppressed sobs occasionally drifted through the night air. At length, a low voice finally answered, "Yes, I am indeed Li Chou of Rosei." An-san, forgetting his fear, dismounted from his horse and stepped closer to the thicket, his voice filled with warmth as he greeted his long-lost friend. Then, he asked why Li Chou would not emerge from the underbrush. Li Chou's voice answered from within, "I am no longer as I once was. I have become a creature unlike man. How could I disgrace myself by revealing such a wretched form to an old friend? Moreover, if you were to see me now, you would surely be overcome with fear and disgust. And yet, having unexpectedly encountered you here, I am overcome with such nostalgia that I forget even my shame. Please, for just a short while, let us speak as we once did. Look past my loathsome appearance and speak with me as the Li Chou you once knew." Later, when An-san reflected upon this moment, he found it strange that he had so readily accepted such a supernatural phenomenon without question. But at that time, he did not hesitate in the slightest. He ordered his attendants to halt their procession and stood beside the thicket, conversing with the unseen voice. They spoke of the latest rumors from the capital, of old friends and their whereabouts, of Am-san's current position, and Li Chou offered his congratulations. Their conversation flowed freely, in the same familiar tone they had once shared in their youth, unburdened by formality. At last, An-san asked, "How did you come to be in this state?" And from the depths of the tall grass, Li Chou's voice began to recount his tale. "About a year ago, while I was traveling, I stopped for the night by the banks of the Josu River. I had slept for a short while when I suddenly awoke to the sound of someone calling my name outside. I stepped out to answer the voice, but I saw nothing, only the darkness. Yet the voice continued to call, beckoning me forward. Without thinking, I followed it, running blindly into the night. Somewhere along the way, I found myself deep within the mountains and forests. And then, I do not know when or how it happened, I realized I was no longer running upright. My hands had fallen to the ground, clawing at the earth as I moved. A strange strength surged through my body, and I leapt over rocks with ease. As dawn began to break, I approached a valley stream and caught my reflection in the water. I had become a tiger. At first, I could not believe my own eyes. Then I told myself it was merely a dream. I had experienced dreams before, in which I knew, within the dream itself, that I was dreaming. But this was not a dream. When I was finally forced to accept the truth, I was struck with a numbing shock, and then terror. It was a terror deeper than anything I had ever known. I realized at that moment that anything was possible in this world. No matter how absurd or impossible, all things could come to pass. But why had this happened to me? I did not know. No, we never know anything. We are forced to accept whatever fate thrusts upon us without reason and live our lives without understanding why. At that moment, I thought of death. But just as the thought crossed my mind, a rabbit dashed across my path, and in an instant, the human within me vanished. When my human consciousness returned, I found my mouth drenched in blood. Rabbit fur was scattered all around me. That was my first experience as a tiger. What I have done since then is unspeakable. I cannot bring myself to recount it. But even now, for a few hours each day, my human mind returns. During those hours, I can think as I once did. I can speak as I once did. I can even recall the verses of the classics I once studied. But those are also the most wretched, most horrifying moments of all. For in those moments, I see the remnants of my savagery, and I am forced to look upon the fate that has befallen me. And with each passing day, the time when I am human grows shorter and shorter. At first, I wondered how I had become a tiger. But the other day, I realized something terrifying. I was now wondering how I had ever been human. That realization chilled me to the bone. Before long, my human consciousness will vanish completely, buried beneath the instincts and habits of a beast. Like the ruins of an ancient palace, slowly sinking into the earth, my humanity will be lost beneath the weight of time. And when that happens, I will forget everything. I will no longer remember that I was ever a man. If I were to meet you again then, I would not recognize you as an old friend. I would tear you apart and devour you without the slightest hesitation. All creatures, whether beast or man, must have once been something else. Perhaps, at first, they remember, but over time, they forget. Then they come to believe they have always been what they are now. But what does it matter? If my human soul disappears entirely, I suppose I will finally find peace. And yet, the human within me dreads that more than anything. Ah, how dreadful! How sorrowful! How unbearably painful it is to know that I will one day forget that I was ever a man. No one can understand this agony. No one except someone who has suffered the same fate as I have. But before that happens, before my humanity is lost forever, there is one thing I must ask of you. The entire entourage, led by Ensan, listened in breathless silence as the voice from the thicket continued its tale. It is nothing more than this, Li Cho's voice went on. I had always intended to make my name as a poet. And yet, before I could achieve anything, fate has cast me into this wretched existence. I once composed hundreds of poems, but none were ever brought to light. By now, my remaining manuscripts must be lost forever. However, there are still a few dozen verses that I can recall with perfect clarity. I wish for you to record them for me, not because I seek to call myself a poet. I do not know whether my work is of any worth, but I spent my entire life devoted to my craft, so much so that I drove myself to ruin and madness in its pursuit. If even a fragment of my work is not passed on to future generations, I will never find peace, even in death. Onsan immediately ordered his attendants to take up brush and ink. From within the thicket, Li Cho's voice rang out, clear and strong. He recited 30 poems, some long, some short, but all of them bore a refined elegance, a depth of thought that spoke of an extraordinary talent. And yet, as Ansan listened in admiration, an indistinct feeling crept over him. Indeed, his talent is beyond question. His natural gifts are of the highest order. But even so, there is something missing, something subtle, almost imperceptible. A delicate yet crucial element separates these works from being truly first-rate. Just as he finished reciting his old poems, Li Chou's voice suddenly changed. It took on a bitter, mocking tone, as though ridiculing himself. It is shameful, truly shameful. Even now, even after I have fallen to this wretched state, I still dream. I dream that my collection of poetry sits upon the desks of refined scholars in Qian. I see it in my mind as I lie curled in the darkness of my cave. Go ahead, laugh at me. Laugh at this pitiful man who failed as a poet and became a beast instead. Ansan listened in sorrow, recalling the self-mocking humor of the young Li Chou he had once known. Yes, go on and laugh. In that case, let me amuse you further. I shall compose a poem for this very moment, an impromptu verse, to prove that within this tiger there is still a trace of the man I once was. Ansan gave another order, and his scribe readied his brush. And so Li Chou recited a poem from the darkness of the thicket, one final testament to the remnants of his humanity. By a stroke of madness, I have turned into a different creature. Calamities have followed one after another, and I could not escape them. Now, who dares to challenge these claws and fangs of mine? Once, our names and deeds were equally admired. I am now an outcast, a strange being hidden among the wild grasses. You, meanwhile, have mounted your chariot, full of power and prestige. This evening, as I face the bright moon over the mountain streams, I try to let out a long sigh, but all I can manage is a voiceless wail. The waning moon cast a cold light over the land, and the white dew lay heavy upon the earth. A chill wind whispered through the trees, foretelling the approach of dawn. The men in Ansan's retinue, who had at first been astonished by the strangeness of the situation, now stood in solemn silence, mourning the misfortune of this tragic poet. Li Chou's voice continued from within the thicket. Earlier, I said that I did not know why I had come to this fate, but upon reflection, I realized there may be an explanation after all. When I was human, I deliberately avoided others. People called me arrogant, proud, disdainful. But they never understood that my so-called arrogance was, in truth, something closer to shame. It is true that I once carried a great pride in myself, as was expected of one hailed as a literary genius in my hometown. But it was a cowardly pride. I wished to become a great poet, yet I never sought a master's guidance, nor did I engage with fellow poets to refine my craft. At the same time, I could not bring myself to associate with common folk either. I found it unbearable. Both tendencies stemmed from the same source, my cowardly pride and my overbearing sense of shame. I feared that I was no true jewel, and so I refused to submit myself to the grinding stone of effort. Yet at the same time, I half believed that I was a gem, and so I could not bring myself to mingle with ordinary pebbles. And so I drifted further from society, isolating myself from others, feeding my frustrations and resentments, allowing my own cowardly pride to grow ever fatter. They say that every human is a beast tamer, and the beast they must tame is their own nature. In my case, the beast was my overbearing shame. It was a tiger. It ruined me. It brought suffering to my wife and child. It wounded my friends. And in the end, it transformed even my outward form to match the beast that lurked within me. Now, looking back, I see that I squandered the little talent I had. I used to spout clever phrases. Life is too long to accomplish nothing, yet too short to accomplish everything. But in truth, my life was nothing more than a testament to my own cowardly fear of failure and my lazy unwillingness to endure hardship. How many poets have achieved greatness despite having far less talent than I? They sharpened what little they had through relentless effort. Only now, having become a beast, do I finally see it. And the regret burns me to my very core. I can never return to human life. Even if I were to compose the greatest poem in my mind at this very moment, what means would I have to share it with the world? And beyond that, each day my mind drifts further from man and closer to tiger. What am I to do with this wasted past of mine? The thought is unbearable. At times like these, I climb the cliffs of the distant mountains and howl into the empty valleys. I want someone, anyone, to understand the agony that sears my soul. Even last night, I stood atop that peak and cried out to the moon. I howled in the hope that someone, somewhere, might hear and understand my sorrow. But the beasts of the forest only cowered in fear. The mountains, the trees, the moon, the dewdrops, they see nothing more than a raging tiger howling into the night. No one understands. No one hears. Just as, when I was human, no one ever understood the fragile heart that lay hidden beneath my cold exterior. The dampness of my fur is not from the night dew alone. The darkness around them had begun to fade. Through the gaps between the trees, a mournful bugle call echoed in the distance, heralding the coming of dawn. "It is time to part," Li Cho's voice said. "The moment of intoxication, the time when I must return to being a tiger, is drawing near. But before I bid you farewell, I have one final request. It concerns my wife and child. They remain in Raiku, knowing nothing of what has become of me. When you return from the south, I ask that you tell them I am dead. Do not, under any circumstances, speak of what has transpired here today. This is an audacious request, I know. But if you would take pity on them in their helplessness, if you could see to it that they do not starve or freeze by the wayside, I would be indebted to you beyond measure." As he finished speaking, a heartbreaking wail rose from the thicket, moved to tears, and Sun solemnly vowed to honor Li Cho's wishes. But then, in an instant, Li Cho's voice turned once more to its self-mocking tone. "In truth, I should have asked this of you first, if I were still a man. But of course, I am the kind of wretched creature who worries more for his meager poetry than for his own starving wife and child. That is why I have fallen to this miserable fate." Then he added one final plea. "On your return journey from Rainen, do not pass through this road again. By then, I may be lost in intoxication, unable to recognize you as a friend. I may attack you, And one last thing. When you part from here and reach the hill 100 paces ahead, look back once. I will show myself to you one last time, not out of pride, not to boast of my strength, but so that you may see with your own eyes how wretched I have become, and may never again think of passing this way to seek me. Ansan turned to face the thicket, offering a solemn farewell, and mounted his horse. From within the underbrush, muffled sobs rose once more, deep, sorrowful cries that could not be contained. And San, too, turned back many times as he rode, his eyes clouded with tears. When his party finally reached the hill, they did as they had been told. They turned back to gaze upon the clearing they had left behind. At that moment, from the depths of the underbrush, a great tiger sprang forth onto the path, lifting its head to the pale, fading moon. It let out, too, 3 fierce roars, roars filled with sorrow, fury, and something deeper still. Then, with a final leap, it disappeared back into the thicket, and they never saw it again.